In terms of diet, it's really important to include foods that are low in saturated fat, to include lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and smaller amounts of foods that have higher saturated fat content. So, you know, smaller portions of meat, for example, lower fat cheeses, fish is great. So looking at a good balance there. Well, it's looking at the food that should be eaten. It's going back to the fact that if somebody does have diabetes, for example, if they're on medication, if they're not eating balanced meals, then they may have experienced low blood sugar readings and be more tired and then not eat well. And so it's really important to really focus on food, not only for health later in life, but looking at food as fuel. We sometimes forget that basic component of food, that it's supposed to give us energy. And if you're eating well and you feel better, then you have a better sense of well-being, and you may prepare food more easily. I think it's important these days to look at taking a multi-vitamin and mineral preparation, but one that is not that does not contain any nutrients in excessive amounts. When you're looking at different supplements, people sometimes think, well, they're only vitamins, but in fact, vitamins in large amounts are used in the treatment of diseases. They are like drugs, and so especially for someone who is on different medications, it's important to look at any supplements and make sure that they're not interacting with any medications. Well, I think people need to focus on what they should be eating, not what they shouldn't be. All too often when people think about making dietary changes, they think about what they need to cut out, and it just makes them feel bad. And if you focus on what you're supposed to include at each meal, then you actually are not hungry for the foods you're supposed to eat less of. It's really important to get everybody to buy into healthy eating, but I think at the same time to make sure that the foods that are being eaten are really tasty. And so if everybody's eating healthy foods that are tasty, then it's a pleasure. If the person who is supposed to be following a special diet is eating their own meal on their own, then that's not about healthy eating and pleasure. Well, the research shows that there are many different aspects to food and how food affects artery health. And so it's important to look at eating foods that are rich in disease-fighting compounds, what are called phytochemicals. So eating foods like whole grains and fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, and these foods actually lower blood cholesterol. And so it's about eating the foods that offer protection to the arteries, eating foods that may help to regulate blood pressure, for example. And so when these foods are included, then it's easier to control the risk factors for having a stroke. I think the thing is, what I like to look at in terms of genetics, you're dealt a certain hand, but it's how you play the cards that's really important. So you may have the genes, but the research shows that foods can interact with genetics. And so it's important to do the best you can, not increase the stress that you're under because of your diet, because then that tends to increase blood pressure, for example. But it's really important to do the best you can, but feel good while you're doing it. Well, there are many foods that herbs and spices that can really enhance the taste of food. And so using, for example, fresh herbs are wonderful when you add things like fresh basil to a dish, or parsley with a little bit of lemon juice or a little bit of lemon zest. And what's really interesting is that the research shows that all these foods that you may add to your diet promote heart health or artery health because they contain antioxidants, for example, and antioxidants are artery friendly. One of the things that I suggest for people who live alone or even as part of a family is not to waste cooking opportunities. And so if you are preparing a meal, look at, can you make more of certain ingredients in that meal so that you have a couple of other meals. So for example, it doesn't mean making the same food and eating that same food day after day, but if you're cooking some salmon, for example, then make extra salmon. So maybe you can have it cold tomorrow in a salad and tonight it's hot and it's grilled. Or if you're making a soup or you're a vegetable dish, make more of it and then turn it into a salad the next day. And so that's really the key, is to look at how can you make the most of the effort that you're putting into things. Another thing that really helps people is to plan a menu. Sometimes if you're planning a menu, then you've got the items on hand and you've got that extra that you're going to cook, rather than thinking, oh, I should have bought more so I can have dinner tomorrow. Frozen fruits, frozen vegetables that don't contain any sauces are wonderful, and the quality today is very different than they used to be. So that you can, throw frozen vegetables and make a stir fry, for example, or make a fruit salad. Also, there are canned products that you can use. But one tip that's very important to do is, if you're using something like canned fish, for example, if you're not buying the sodium reduced one, then rinse it a number of times. Or if you're using canned legumes, kidney beans, chickpeas, again, rinse it and drain it, and you will lower the sodium content. So you don't have to cook up your chickpeas from scratch. You can use convenience items, but look at ways to make them, give them a better nutritional profile. The food labels are relatively new, so I think that it's important for people to stop, take the time, compare products. Sometimes when you see a certain number of milligrams of sodium, you might think, what does that mean? One of the things is to use the percentage DV, and that tells you what the percentage is in terms of what you should be getting in a day. And so for some foods that you want more of, look for a higher percentage. But if you're looking at something like sodium and you want less, if you've got two products, go for the one with the lower numbers or the lower percentage. One of the best strategies when you go into a grocery store is to only shop in the perimeter of the store. And so if you're shopping around the edges, then you're going to get the fresh fruits and vegetables, the bakery products, the dairy products. When you start venturing into the other aisles, you're going to get more processed foods that may contain more sodium, for example. Maybe head down the frozen food aisle as well. But generally, if you're going around the perimeter, then it takes you less time, and you're going to get the things that you need. What I suggest to people is, when the food comes, and if you're not starving, then you can sort of evaluate what's on the plate. And at that point, mark your boundaries. I mean, it can be a battle. And so if you look and you see that your meat portion is double what it should be, cut it in half, push half to the other side, and take it home and get an extra meal out of it. It'll taste delicious tomorrow, and you won't end up stuffing yourself today. And then ask how the food is prepared, so that if something comes with a cream sauce, for example, you're not surprised by it. Now, it is better to order foods that aren't saucy, but on the other hand, if you want to have the sauce on the side and you want to taste it, then that's fine. But if you ask how the food's prepared, then you won't be surprised by something that's deep fried or loaded with butter. And so Another tip is that if you don't feel comfortable asking, sometimes phone ahead when the restaurant's not busy, and so you feel less embarrassed by all the questions that you might have. But this way, if you phone them and you say, I'm on a lower fat diet, I need to eat less sodium, which choices would you suggest in the restaurant? And so it makes it less of an issue when you're actually there and the restaurant's busy. The key with fast foods is to know what's in the fast food. So if possible to check the internet beforehand or look at the nutrition information brochures, because sometimes it can be, a name can be quite deceiving, or one extra word, crispy chicken or just chicken, can mean the difference between a lot of fat and a lot of sodium. And if you read the nutrition information brochures, you can see where the sodium and fat may be, and then control the amounts if possible. And so by looking at the information, you really know what the choices are. I think people are fooled sometimes by marketing, you know, and or the use of certain words. So like the word muffin has a connotation of being a healthy snack. It used to be a better snack when it was a small muffin. Now you can buy fat-free muffins, for example, that seem like they would be healthy, but they could be the equivalent of 6 or 7 pieces of bread. And so they can be loaded with sugar, or it could be fat, but they're too many calories. So it's really important not to be misled by marketing or the names of different items. It's really important to look at portions. So if the portions are too large, and even if they're healthy food, then the sodium and fat counts will add up. Now, one thing I tell people is that if something isn't good for them, the criteria they should use as to whether they should eat it is that it should be fabulous tasting. So if it isn't good for you, take one bite only. Think of yourself as a judge in a food contest, rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, and only eat it if it's a 10. So if it's not good for you, but it was incredible tasting, how often does that happen? Well, I think it's important not to draw attention to yourself, because if you do, then everybody tries either to not let you eat, which can be very frustrating, or they want you to eat because it's a celebration and they want to tell you that it's okay. So it's really important to be low-key. Taste small amounts. Have, again, like when you're going out to eat, do not go hungry. Have small amounts, and small amounts of food, even if they are high in sodium or in fat, if they're small amounts, it doesn't add up to that much. So you can still celebrate, but not overdo. People look at foods like, you know, natural, you know, unsweetened juice, and they think, well, it's unsweetened, so I can have lots of juice. And in fact, what happens is when you juice a fruit, you lose the fiber, and you lose other phytochemicals as well, the disease-fighting compounds that may help to lower cholesterol, for example. So juice can be part of a healthy diet, but it should be maybe one choice in a day versus the other ones being the whole fruit with most of the components of the fruit. Looking at prepared foods, for example, if there's not as much mobility and ease of food preparation, looking at different foods and the nutritional content of these foods. So keeping the sodium low, looking at different prepared foods. But there are more options around, and I think it's important that number one, people know that as consumers, when they make purchases, they're telling companies what they want out there. So when people are looking at, for example, even soups or broths, when people go for more lower salt products, then the message is being sent to the company. We should be looking at broadening the number of products we have that are lower in salt. And another thing, I tell people, call the consumer helplines. Call the numbers that are on the label if you have any questions. And if you're not happy with the nutritional profile of a food, take the 5 minutes to call. And the companies will take this very seriously. There are places where people can go and get different foods that are, let's see, if there's a swallowing disorder, for example, there are products available that will help to thicken food so that healthy eating is easier, but it can be very difficult. It's also important to look at if somebody's having a problem chewing, you can use things like blenders, for example, and make smoothies, but using frozen fruits or vegetables, using canned products, they would be softer, and so and they would require less preparation. And because these foods are processed at the peak of their nutritional quality, they tend to be very high in vitamins and minerals, for example. I think that sometimes people think of diet in terms of prevention of heart disease, but somehow stroke gets left out of it. People think that stroke happens. They think that a healthy lifestyle is important in preventing a heart attack, but a healthy lifestyle, and that includes active living and a healthy diet, is really important in stroke prevention.